I think we can begin. The last people seeping in. Perfect. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining me here today, despite the wonderful weather, to sit in a dusty, dark classroom. I'm going to talk about visual regression testing with BackstopJS. I'm Wannes. I'm one of the developers at Calibrate. Also part of the Drupal team at VDAB. That's Clara over there and Lorenz over there. I'm going to talk about first some context. What is the VDAB? What do we do there? Then, of course, what is BackstopJS? Some examples of a workflow, how you compose tests, and then some ways we customized Backstop and its scripts, and then some testing strategies and also minor pitfalls we came across, for example. So what is the VDAB? It's the Dutch abbreviation for Vlaamse Dienst voor Arbeidsbemiddeling en Beroepsopleidingen. In short, the Public Employment Service of Flanders. So normally only Dutch speaking, but today in English. So what does the VDAB do? We find job offers or connect people who are looking for a job to jobs. Works both ways. They provide training for people who want to re-educate themselves for the job market. Also apply for employment benefits if somebody loses their job. Under certain conditions, they can get some benefits. And of course, a lot of advice, B2B, for advice for businesses, how to hire their first employee, for example, stuff like that. We have not only vdab.be as website, we also have werkgevers. It's the B2B platform, extranet, intranet. It's a closed system only for employees of the VDAB. And then some smaller project sites or campaign sites, no big websites like VDAB. But these are the main websites we focus on the Drupal, inside the Drupal team at VDAB. So I think everybody knows the VDAB by now. Some statistics, we do about 9.5 million page views a month, like averaged down, I think 400,000 page views a day. So it's not a small site, of course. We have quite a standard or modest stack. We have some Varnish, also some Memcache for the well-needed caching on our websites, and Apache Web Server, PHP, MySQL, and we use Elastic for all our backend search indexes. Also a bit about the testing stack we use at VDAB. Of course, I think most people know the testing pyramid. At the bottom, you should have the most amount of tests, then a little bit less tests of the integration functional tests, and then end-to-end, the smallest amount of tests in an ideal scenario. We also have unit tests, BA tests, and above that, backstop tests as the end-to-end tests. Of course, the higher you go on the pyramid, the more expensive your tests become, and that's sort of true for backstop. There is some points to argue it's not the case anymore. Maybe it used to be. So the testing pyramid is quite an old idea. I don't think it's very up to date according to the modern standards. So yeah, of course, the higher you go, the more expensive. Now, why should you do visual regression tests? Traditional testing methods like unit or beheads or functional tests, they do catch bugs, like a button doesn't work, a function call doesn't work anymore, but they fall short when it comes to addressing the visual aspects of a website. You can't verify if the background color is still the same. or the size of a component is still the same in a behead or a unit test. So that's where Backstop comes in, of course. Yeah, some examples of all the unit tests do pass. It works, but how does it work? How does it look? Not very, not really good. Same for this. Yeah, the everything functional about that part of the tests is okay. All the tests are passing, but obviously it doesn't look good. So that's a perfect example for why you could need visual regression tests. So it's just to maintain the visual integrity of your application. Is it layout? Is it color? Is it font size? Whatever. Or if you have like hard-coded SVGs in your components for purely visual stuff, that's stuff you can't test in a behead test, for example. So yeah, that's why we do Backstop. There's only one way to test such visual things, and that's of course screenshots. There comes BackstopJS. It's a powerful visual regression testing framework, actually, designed to catch those unintentional changes to the layout or the color or the font size or whatever. For example, when you're updating your Drupal site, you could run just a small test scenario of your homepage and the contact page, for example, just to check that your Drupal core updates didn't break anything layout or font size or color-wise on your page. Other tests will cover the more functional stuff, like unit and behead tests, of course. Some information about Backstop. It's open source, completely written in JavaScript. That's why it's in the Drop Solid room. It's mostly operated via the command line, so just Backstop as main arguments, as main command, and then some arguments you can pass to it. And it's actually just a screenshot comparing framework. I deliberately say framework because it's really easily expandable. You can write upon the JavaScript of Backstop itself, etc. Some core features, it renders its test scenarios in a headless browser. By default, that's Chrome. You can simulate interactions, you can push buttons, hover over buttons, fill in forms, for example, submit forms, whatever. The reporting comes in various forms. Just in a command line, you can easily read the output of how many tests have passed. It also provides an HTML report. Some examples will come later. JUnit, I think JUnit is more like the Java world, not really PHP or Drupal, but still a standard in the test reporting world. Because it's all command line, it plays really nice with CI/CD and source control like Git. For example, at VDAB, we use it only in Jenkins. So that's the only way we interact with Backstop. It's through Jenkins. We just Jenkins runs the commands for us. It supports Docker. There's a pre-built image you can download from Docker Hub. But of course, you can install it natively on your laptop as well. And last but not least, incredibly easy to use. Just 3 commands, and that's all you need to begin testing, write your tests, and reference, etc. Further peek under the hood, yeah, it's all JavaScript, and the configuration files are in JSON. BackstopJS has support for Node version 20. I think version 21 and 22 are already out. It's a bit late with that, but like the least supported version is 8, so you have quite some time to catch up. And as I mentioned before, the headless browser is by default Chrome, but you can use other headless browsers, for example, Firefox and I think Safari with Playwright. Puppeteer is used to instruct the browser to hover and click on stuff. Playwright is the other side for Firefox, for example. So how does a BackstopJS workflow look like? Of course, you set up tests. That we'll come to that later. You have to provide Backstop with some URLs as to what page you like to take a screenshot of. The next would be to set a baseline or a reference, as it's called in Backstop, just to determine and let Backstop know what is my page or my website or my web application supposed to look like. What is currently the baseline or the reference. Then you can run your tests. You can decide whenever to do this. You can do it on your local machine every time you do a composer update. You can initiate it through Jenkins like we do at VDAB. You can choose to run it every hour or just daily or whatever. Every option is open. Then, of course, a manual step is to check the report. Obviously, sometime you have to check if all the Backstop tests are still in the green. There are no differences between what is recorded in the baseline or the references or what is recorded on the test. That's a manual step. You have to scroll through it, for example, to see which pages might have an error. But of course, sometimes clients ask to change stuff. For example, enlarge the font size or change the background color of something. So you have to renew the baseline, and that's an approve command. So those are the three basic commands: reference, test, and approve. Those are the only commands you need to know to use Backstop. Yeah, so again, Backstop init sets up a folder with the basic JSON and JavaScript components. Then you can start with a reference. Just set the baseline of what is your desired state of the application or website. Then do some tests, and perhaps if you did some intentional changes, you can approve. That's an optional step, of course. You can also switch tests and reference around. Backstop is really easy with that. You can first run the test. Then, of course, the tests are all going to fail because there is no reference. And then you can simply use the screenshots used in a test as the references by running the approve job. Yeah, some more requirements. So version 8 to 20. You can install it globally on your laptop via npm install globally Backstop, or use the Docker image. Then it's even more easy. Just run Docker run backstop/backstop. And of course, you need a running website or web application somewhere. Is it a development environment running on one of your servers, or the production environment, or a local version? That's all optional. You can configure the URL where Backstop is going to look in the test. So the first command, the Backstop init, it sets up a few things. The Backstop JSON is the default file where Backstop will search for all your configuration. The configuration comes in the form of some global stuff and, of course, your test scenarios themselves. And then in the Backstop data folder, that's where Backstop will store your screenshots and your references in 2 separate folders, of course, and also some custom scripts. If you want to interact with a cookie banner, for example, that's a script you can put in the Backstop data folder. Looks something like this. There are some default scripts included by Backstop themselves, divided in 2 separate folders, one for Puppet, one for Playwright. If you want to, Puppet is for the Chrome headless browsers, Playwright is for the Firefox and other WebKit browsers. There are some default scripts like load cookies. You can tell Backstop to set some cookies on every request, so you can bypass a cookie banner, for example. There are some helpers for the click and hover stuff, but that's all basic configuration that's provided when you run Backstop init. Once it's initialized, you can start to change those scripts and add stuff and what else. That's something I'll come to later. Yeah, so the BackstopJSON file looks something like this. It's a bit small, but I'll go in detail on a few of the options. So, of course, a very important option is the viewports you want Backstop to render your website in. You can provide as many viewports as you like. We did like these 3 basic ones for mobile, tablet, and desktop, of course. And you can provide pixels. We adjusted the pixels to match, sort of match the most used screens, or like the breakpoints used in our house style or house brand CSS. But this, of course, you can change this as you like. Some other scripts, other options. For example, the paths, you can tell Backstop to store his reference and test screenshots somewhere else. By default, it's these folders, but you can specify anything you like there. Another very important one, the before and on ready scripts. So these are default scripts provided by Backstop when you run Backstop init. They are found in the folder previously created. You can overwrite them. You can insert another script here if you like. Everything is possible. Then, of course, some configuration for which browser engine you like to use. By default, again, Puppeteer. You can add some options if you like to do some custom stuff. And of course, what types of reporting you'd like Backstop to do. By default, it's only browser, so it generates a static HTML file with all the comparisons in. Or you can add CLI to that, so it's reports, like, for example, to Jenkins, what the output of the tests were. Yeah, so that's the last of the global configuration. And then, of course, the configuration for the test scenarios themselves. The scenarios are found under the scenarios key in the JSON file and consist of some basic label just to give it a name. Of course, a URL, really important if you want to visit some page, for example, the home page or the contact page of your website. So the URL, the cookie path. This is a JSON file where you can list in a JSON format, of course, which cookies you'd like Backstop to add to every request. For example, really handy when you want to bypass a cookie banner, so Backstop doesn't take a screenshot of your cookie banner every time he visits a page. Another option, the ready selector. This tells Backstop to wait to take the screenshots until he sees this selector. For example, really handy when you try to take a screenshot of some pop-up, or you want to make sure the main content of the website is already loaded when you use like a JavaScript generated website. Backstop will just wait until it sees that selector and then take the screenshot. Of course, you can still add your own delay again. The hide selectors is an option to tell Backstop which selectors you don't want to see. There is a difference between the remove and the hide selectors. The hide selectors just visually hides some selector, some component, but it keeps the same place. It's literally a CSS visibility hidden. And the remove selectors really remove them out of the DOM. So they don't take any place. It's like a display none sort of situation. You can work the other way around and list which selectors you do want to test, and then it takes a screenshot only of those selectors. You can provide a selector you like to hover or click. The post-interaction wait is for both the hover and the click selector. So he waits for some milliseconds before taking a screenshot after you clicked or hovered on something. And I think last, the mismatch thresholds. This is like the sensitivity setting of Backstop. if you set it to 0, Backstop would just fail almost any test because there's like 1 pixel difference, because browsers, they just render the page and there's always something a bit off, like the pixel density is a bit different, for example. If you set it to like 0.1, or I think the default is 0.25, I'm not sure, that will ensure your tests are good enough to be visually the same, but allows for such small discrepancies between the rendering of 2 different headless browser sessions, for example. So you end up with like a JSON file with all those stuff in. First, the global configuration, and then, of course, all your test scenarios themselves. Every test scenario listed, for example, your home page, then your contact page, then some landing page or whatever. That's how you build up the tests. Then we can start running them. If you run the command backstop test, by default, it will just search for the backstop.json file in the current directory, read it out, all the global configuration and all the test scenarios. It will run in the background. You won't see anything. You can enable like a debug option, so you see a headless browser popping up and clicking through the site very quickly. You cannot follow it. And then, of course, you get some command line feedback about how your tests have run. Have they passed or have they failed? And then, if you configured so, and by default it is, it also generates a browser report. So yeah, this is a CLI output for a test that has 12 failed, apparently. And then, of course, the browser report. So that's a static HTML file Backstop generates, and it provides some handy tools for, first of all, seeing if some tests have failed. Yeah, you can easily see 0 passed, 12 failed. And then, of course, in the middle column, there is a test. If there are references, you can see on the left, for example. I'll show you some other examples later. And then, of course, the last command you can run is the backstop approve. This will just move the test screenshots taken to the references and set them as a new baseline. You also get some small command line feedback about that, and you can see here, for example, triplecom test BackstopJS mobile tablet and screen.png moved to the approve to the reference folder. Yeah. So backstop tests. This is how a report in this command line looks when you have 12 passed tests, of course. Now the JSON file, I think I'm going to do a live demo. I'm not sure if I have time. Yeah. I'm not sure where this is going to pop up. I can't see the screen here. Maybe we'll do a live demo after. I'm just going to continue. But short, when you have a backstop.json file, you can just run backstop test, approve, or reference, and then test again, for example. Now some examples and explanation about how you can customize backstop.js. All the scripts can be customized. You can add your own scripts. When you run backstop init, it provides like the default on ready and on before scripts, but you can add to those or delete, for example. Yeah, over here. Also, the configuration is customizable, of course. And we wouldn't be developers if we didn't reuse most of our functionalities or made some changes to automate some of the steps. And that's what we did at the VDAB, of course. So for example, the onBefore.js, pretty explanatory. It sets up the browser states before the request is made. So for example, it injects cookies in this script. I think there's an example. Yeah, here's the onBefore.js. It's just JavaScript. You can see it loads the cookies. It sets some user agents correct, so the site renders accordingly to the user agent, for example. There's a custom script we made, for example, to log in. So before the screenshots are taken, this script goes through the steps of navigating to /user for the Drupal site, filling in a username and password, and then when this script returns true, then it goes to the page it wants to test and takes a screenshot. The onReady script obviously fires when the website is ready loading or done loading. And you can modify the browser state at this point. For example, the cookie banner, some cookie banners don't support the use of preset cookies. They don't read in the cookies. You have to manually click the cookie banner away. That's something you can do in that script, for example. So these files are all created on the init command, of course, and configured here. You can overwrite them. You can also overwrite the before and ready scripts in a scenario itself. So, for example, you have one test that is really specific and needs some very custom scripts. You can just use the default onBefore and onReady scripts of BackstopJS and only overwrite the scripts for one scenario. It's possible. So this is the onReady.js file. Here you can see the click and hover helper is loaded. So that one will click and hover on anything that needs to be screenshotted. Something we added is the wait for the fonts to be loaded, because sometimes that could be a little slow in the headless browser. And then, for example, the cookie can send custom scripts loaded when we want to manually click the cookie banner away. So by default, Backstop searches for like a Backstop JSON file, but of course you can override it. You can add the --config parameter and provide another JSON file, as long as it just exports something that looks like a JSON object. Of course, it has to be valid JSON, but this made it possible for us to not only just make one long Backstop JSON file with all our configuration. No, we actually made a JavaScript file that generates the JSON used to run the tests. And in this JavaScript file, you can do really anything you want. We use it to inject some environment variables to search for the right environment on our dev acceptance and pre-production websites, for example. And that's how we split it up. So you have one custom BackstopJS file, you have some Backstop settings, just to divide all the logic between some files, then a JavaScript file just where the test scenarios are listed, a JavaScript file where the environments are listed, and one where, for example, the credentials are listed. And that's how we came upon the setup to have like a global Backstop scripts and config repository with like the main functionality, all our custom scripts that can be shared across websites. In there are the before and onReady scripts. And then in each website has its own repository, of course. There are the site-specific stuff. For example, the Backstop tests themselves. They are, of course, specific to the website. That's stored in the repository of the website itself. On Composer install, we just pull in the global Backstop config repository with all our custom scripts, and every site just uses that. That's some example of how we did it. We made a VDAB root type in Composer. So we just store the Backstop scripts folder in the root of the website. Looks something like this. So yeah, BackstopJS is just JavaScript code. It's really easy to manipulate and build tests in. So now for some testing strategies, because of course, there are some options of how to use Backstop. You could run the tests on your local machine and compare your screenshots to the production environment. That's an option. You could move those screenshots up every environment. So every environment you go higher, from development to acceptance to pre-production, for example, you take your screenshots with you, so you know every time you run the tests again, your website still is compatible with the production environment. Or you could create separate references for every environment. That's what we did at the VDAB. It seemed easier because we do, of course, a lot of changes to how the site is visually changed, and otherwise we would have to reference a lot more times. So we created separate references for every environment. We have some custom pages we made with like all the variations of paragraphs and components listed, so we can easily go to that page, take a screenshot, and we are sure we have tested like most of the stuff on our website. That's also one of the drawbacks. You have to manually upkeep the content. If you change a component, you have to add an option or whatever. It's a bit of work, which is not very ideal, we think. So that's one of the drawbacks, of course. You have to have a lot of manual interaction with the content and the tests. It requires some attention. The stability as a drawback, it's a bit relative, of course, but we have some issues that we need to approve the tests a lot because something really small has changed. Or for example, an image hasn't loaded in on time, and that of course fails the test. But generally speaking, that's quite all right. And of course, test content maintenance, what I mentioned earlier, have to manually keep your content up to date. So credits where credit's due. This wasn't built by me alone. Of course, it's to all the developers of the VDAB Drupal team, one of them sitting there. Are there any questions? I have like the... Yeah.
Test. Hello. Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to ask: is BackstopJS also open source, or?
Yeah, it's open source.
Okay. So it's
you can find it on GitHub. I think. No, last slide. I put a slide with all the reference links in. So the first one there on the first one is like an internal Git repository. That's a mistake. But the second one, GitHub, is BackstopJS code base. And of course, some references to the Puppeteer and Playwright documentation and GitHub repositories as well, because that's the browser engine Backstop uses, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah. Could you maybe share some metrics, like how many tests are you running for the moment at VDAB, and how many of them, how often do they fail? And if they fail, do you also have false positives?
We sometimes have false positives. For example, the one I mentioned about an image not loading quickly enough. So Backstop loads a page, but our images are loaded in asynchronously, so a little bit later. Certainly, if it's very way down on the page, Backstop normally handles it pretty well, but we had an issue with an image not loading, and the test kept failing because the image, when you manually go to the page, it's there, but Backstop just doesn't see it because it takes the screenshot a bit too fast. And an option is, of course, to just increase the delay before taking a screenshot. But yeah, if you add a delay of 1 second to 50 tests, it's on whole test seats, it's another minute added to the whole thing. But in generally, it's still pretty fast, of course. When, for example, you have the debug option in the global configuration, so you can see the headless browser's backstop is spinning up. You cannot keep up with it, and it loads a page, takes the screenshots, goes to the next tests. I think Behat has a very similar option. Like the amount of tests we run depends. Can I go to the first slide easily? Yeah, for example, for the main site, VDAB.be, of course, our biggest and most famous site, we have like 50 tests. Then we have werkgevers is maybe 20 or 25 tests, extranet as well. Internet, we don't have any tests at all because it uses a really old version of our hairstyle. Corporate style. And werkzakelpunt and Work in Flanders, I think maybe 5 tests, just the homepage, contact page, or whatever. And yeah, because the sites are only 5 pages. So, and yeah, how many false positives, I couldn't say. Like most of the approves or references we do is because we deliberately changed something. But of course, we are a team of 13 people working on only 4, maybe 6 sites. We do a lot of changes, of course. So really depends.
Okay, thanks.
Would you recommend adding this at the beginning of a project, or is it something you add later when you have a more stable?
I would recommend adding it later, because in the beginning of development, when you only have like half of your pages or functional stuff built, you're going to put a lot of effort in updating those tests and adding the tests while you're working on adding the new features. I think it's easier to just, the project is finished or somewhat finished, then you list up all your main pages or the main components you want to test. Just write one single JSON file with all them in it. And I think the most used case is actually when you are giving support on that web app or application or website. When you update the Node version, or I don't know, whatever the Drupal core version in our case, mostly, you want to make sure that all your pages still work. And therefore, I think it's easier to add it later.
Almost right. Hi, I think you, in your configuration file, you managed, or you mentioned something about a setting that indicated the amount of variation that you accept. I think it was set to 0.0, and the default was 0.25, you mentioned, I think.
Something like that, yeah.
I was wondering, how did you arrive to that setting? I mean, did you have to fiddle around with it a lot, or?
I think the screenshot is maybe from the default or from our configuration. I'm not sure, but still a good question. Mm-hmm. For example, what we noticed is when we take a screenshot or we have a test of a really long page, like we have 30, 40 components or paragraphs with text and photo and then a media block and then an embedded video or whatever, and it's a really long page, then you can increase the sensitivity because it's such a big page. But when you test something really small on a page, like one single component, you of course have to adjust your sensitivity. So it occurs, I think, I'm not sure about the example, but like we tested one single block, maybe 200 pixels wide and high, and we had to increase the sensitivity. Otherwise, Backstop didn't record any changes on it.
Right. Yeah.
So normally the default is fine, but if you really play with which selectors you want to test on a page, for example, only one single component or one giant page, depending on it, you can increase or decrease the sensitivity.
Okay. Thank you.
I can also add to that as an answer that every day we look to our tests. We do like a weather forecast of our test, how green or red is it. And during those moments, we also see if the test was too shaky and we have to change this number or if we have to change anything. So it's a daily looking at how good are our tests also. Is everything okay, but also is there grooming to be done?
Yeah, we do it daily indeed, because of course we only have 5 sites to look at. But in a context of an agency, for example, that maintains hundreds of websites, it's more approachable if you just run a test only when you did some updates or did some really large change for the client, for example. We can, because we are only maintaining 4 main websites, we can put the time in to check it every day, and it all depends, of course. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, he mentions we include the corporate style. It's a different team that writes the CSS for our website. We only do like the Drupal part, and another team does the CSS part. We just do the translation between the corporate styles they provide, and we implement or use them in Drupal. So that's the difficulty, that we are dependent on the team. There was another question.
Yeah, so I may have missed something regarding visual regression testing, but how do you deal with testing live data, sites that have a lot of data that changes a lot, because you're comparing screenshots, which means you're comparing moments in time. So do you then test more components in isolation or full pages? And if you do full pages, how do you deal with stuff that changes all the time?
It's a bit of a mix. We have some tests that take screenshots of really small components on, for example, the homepage of VDAB. I think for example, this is a component, and we take a screenshot of only this. So we made a configuration of the scenario so that the only selectors that Backstop takes a screenshot of is the selector that is like the wrapper of this component. Then also the other example, if I can find my cursor. Over here, we have some pages, all the way at the end, of course. We created some content pages which just lists all the content, all the components with some demo, lorem ipsum, for example, all the way at the back. Here. So this is a list of the contents page of Drupal, of course, and you see like we have a BackstopJS content page version 2, because we had a version 1 once, part 1, then a content page with only media, so we have like a slideshow, etc. And these pages are they are on the live site, so you can actually visit them, but they of course are blocked from Google and other things, so they don't come up in Google. That's how we do it on a production site. Of course, for the lower environments, the development sites, etc., just the same pages, but of course the environment is not available to the public. So this is one part of the pages we test. We also test like the homepage and some major landing pages on the website, but we just exclude like the parts that could change a lot.
So that's also a possibility in your scenarios. You can say, take
Yeah.
me a screenshot of that page, but
Yeah.
exclude.
You can do it both ways. So you can say, take a screenshot of whole page, but leave out this selector and this selector, for example, or other way around, take a screenshot of only that selector on the page. It's both ways. Time's up. Thanks.